OK, so let's get the thoughts of Daniel McAdams, the Executive Director at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel, good to have you back on RT International. Where do you think this split's going to head? They've always bickered about money. Now they can't even decide on the ambassador for the next person in that role. Where do you see this split heading?
Well, I think it's all very healthy because everyone is going to have their bluff called. The Europeans are screaming about Russian aggression and how they must do something about Russian aggression. It obviously, if they felt threatened, they would spend more of their own money defending themselves, as any normal person would if they felt threatened. The United States, on the other hand, wants to essentially have an empire, but it wants the Europeans to be subservient, and President Trump wants to do the impossible, which is spend $1 trillion a year on the military, $1 trillion a year on infrastructure, and however much on upgrading the nuclear arsenal. It's absolutely impossible. So heads are going to clash, and I think it's a very good thing because it might bring us to really reassessing what are our defense objectives rather than the U.S. military empire's objectives.
Right, what's Trump going to do then, do you think? Because money is tight in Europe among a lot of these states, but equally they can't expect the United States to keep bankrolling this NATO machine in perpetuity. And yes, it's easy for a presidential candidate to talk tough about NATO funding. Different when they're in the Oval Office. What do you think he's going to do?
Well, I think there is a fundamental clash, as I said earlier, and there will be one between Juncker and Trump, and I welcome it. I'll pop the popcorn to see it. I think it's very helpful to have this clash. The U.S. spends more on its military than the next 7 nations combined. The Russian military spending is, I think, a seventh of the U.S., very, very small, or 10th of the U.S. spending. So the fact of the matter is the U.S. spends an enormous amount on the military to maintain its empire. And you're right, it cannot continue. The Europeans are not going to spend the 2% that's required. So what's going to happen next? Trump is sending mixed signals. He sent Mattis over to play the tough guy, to say the U.S. is all in for NATO, but you got to pay up. The Europeans aren't going to pay up, so we'll see who blinks first.
Yeah, it's not just on that side of the Atlantic if there's mixed signals. Europe's doing it as well. On the one side, Europe keeps saying we don't need to keep increasing our spending on NATO. At the same time, some of the members are saying, oh, no, we need more protection.
No, they want protection, but they want it for free, and they want to provoke Russia by putting troops on Russia's border and then complaining about Russian aggression. Well, they can't have it both ways. They're going to have to make a decision. Are they going to change their foreign policy? I think it would be best if all nations spent less on the military. I would like to see the U.S. spend, instead of 4%, 2% or less, figure out what our real needs are and spend according to our needs rather than the demands of the military-industrial complex, which frankly is what NATO is all about. It's about selling U.S. weapons overseas, forcing U.S. weapons down the throats of countries that can't afford to buy them, to enrich people in Washington.
Just briefly, what does this bode for on a wider scale if they're bickering over military spending, which is a significant thing for a lot of these countries? Where's this going to lead US-EU relations, do you think? Is it going to be a decisive, divisive factor?
Well, I hope the U.S. will return to looking at the EU as more bilateral relations. I think we'll be forced to do that with the UK. I think the U.S. may also already be doing that with countries like Hungary that have shown themselves to be more amenable to President Trump's view of the world and of immigration and such. So a return to bilateral relations would be, I think, an improvement for the United States. And I think it's something probably that the president, at least on a good day, would prefer.
Yeah. Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute. Really good to get your thoughts on that tonight. Thanks for joining us.